The gas station I worked at was the last one for about 30 miles in any direction. It was just outside a tiny town in rural Kentucky, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nobody ever locks their doors. Except for me. I worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I always made sure that steel door was locked tight. The building itself was a relic, with a flickering fluorescent sign and a payphone that hadn't worked since the 90s, sitting out by the pumps. Most nights, the only customers were late-night truckers or the occasional lost tourist. The solitude was usually the best part of the job. It gave me plenty of time to read and catch up on my podcasts. But that all changed one Tuesday night in the middle of a cold snap. I was about 3 hours into my shift, around 2 a.m. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows. The only sound inside was the soft buzz of the refrigerators and the gentle thrum of the coffee machine. I was sitting on a stool behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, when the landline phone on the counter rang. This was a surprise. The number for the gas station was unlisted, only used by the owner and the manager. No customer ever called it. I picked it up. "Hello, this is Joe's Gas. How can I help you?" Total silence on the other end. Not a dial tone, not static, just nothing. No breathing, no background noise. Nothing. I waited for a few seconds, then hung up. Must have been a wrong number. A little weird, but not a big deal. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Same deal. I answered, and again, nothing. Just a dead line. I hung up, a little more annoyed this time. It felt like some kid messing around with a burner phone, but who would even know this number? And why bother? The nearest house was a few miles away. The third time the phone rang, I didn't answer right away. I just stared at it, watching it vibrate and ring on the countertop. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. This wasn't a wrong number anymore. This was a pattern. The ringing stopped after about 10 seconds, and then, almost immediately, it started again. I picked it up. "Look, whoever this is, you need to stop," I said, my voice sharp and a little shaky. "I'm going to call the police." A low, guttural chuckle came from the other end. It was a dry, raspy sound like sandpaper against wood. It sent a cold shiver down my spine. "You don't need to do that," the voice said. It was a man, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I just wanted to say hi." I was frozen. "How did you get this number?" I managed to stammer. "Doesn't matter," the voice whispered. "I can see you. You look tired." I dropped the phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He could see me. I slowly, cautiously, looked up at the large glass window that made up the front of the store. The parking lot was empty. The lights were on, illuminating the pumps and the first few yards of the field across the highway. There was no car, no person, no shadow. I rushed to the back room, grabbed my personal phone, and dialed the manager. The store phone kept ringing and ringing in the background. My manager, Mike, a gruff old guy who'd seen everything, answered on the third ring. "What's up? Everything okay?" "No, Mike, it's not. Someone's calling the store phone and they said they can see me. The line's been ringing nonstop." "Calm down," Mike said, his voice flat. "Probably some kids messing with you. Just unplug the phone for the night. I'll get the number changed tomorrow. Just to be safe, stay in the back for a bit, okay?" I went back to the front counter, my eyes darting to the window every few seconds. I grabbed the landline phone and yanked the cord out of the wall. The silence was immediate and absolute. It was a blessed relief. I retreated to the back room, pulling the door shut behind me, and sat on a crate, hugging my knees. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I couldn't shake it. I must have sat there for a good 30 minutes, my personal phone in my hand, ready to call 911 at a moment's notice. I was just starting to feel a little silly when I heard a sound from the front of the store, a faint scratching noise, like fingernails scraping against glass. My breath hitched. I got up slowly, carefully. The back room door had a small window. I peered through it. The front of the store was still, but the lights from the pumps were casting long shadows through the front window. The scratching sound came again, louder this time. It sounded like it was coming from the front door. I crept to the door and listened. The scratching stopped, but now I heard a new sound. A low, rhythmic thumping, like someone was knocking softly on the glass with the palm of their hand. Thump, thump, thump. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The knocking stopped. I waited, breathing heavily, my eyes squeezed shut. Then I heard it, the soft jingle of the bell above the front door. But no one came in. I was losing my mind. I knew it. But the feeling was too real. I slowly opened my eyes. The front of the store was silent and empty. The bell was still. I was about to dismiss it as my imagination when I looked at the glass front door. On the inside of the glass, right at eye level, was a single tiny smudge. It looked like a fingerprint. A thumbprint, to be exact. It was fresh, and it was right next to a small circular condensation mark, as if someone had just pressed their mouth against the cold glass. I stared at it, a cold dread washing over me. I hadn't gone outside. No one had come in. My hands were shaking. How did that get there? I heard a soft click from the front counter. I looked up. The landline phone, the one I had just unplugged, was on the floor. It hadn't been there before. I was certain of it. I'd left it on the counter. The cord was still dangling from the wall. I heard the quiet thud as the receiver hit the floor. He must have somehow knocked it off the counter. He was so close. He was right there. I don't know why, but I knew in my gut he wasn't gone. He was still watching. I spent the rest of the night crouched in the back room, my phone clutched in my hand, staring at the floor. I didn't dare look at the window again. The minutes crawled by like hours. When the first rays of sunlight hit the floor, I finally exhaled. I waited until Mike showed up, and then I sprinted to my car and drove away without a word. I never went back. To this day, I can't look at a landline phone without feeling that cold knot in my stomach. Working the night shift at a gas station on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, is a strange kind of loneliness. The desert night is vast and silent, and the only light for miles comes from the station's bright canopy, which throws harsh, artificial light onto the pumps. The air is always hot, even at 3 a.m. It's a dry heat that clings to you and makes the asphalt shimmer. The solitude was usually a comfort. I could just zone out, listen to music, and watch the dust devils dance in the distance. One unusually still night, the air was thick and heavy, not a single gust of wind to break the silence. I was sitting inside, staring at the monitors that displayed the pumps. The light from the canopy was so bright it cast sharp black shadows. That's when I noticed the first unusual thing. On pump 3 there was a shadow. It was long and thin, like a person's, but it was just there, not attached to a person or an object. The light from the canopy should have been hitting the pump from the side, casting a shadow from the pump itself, not a figure. And there was no one at pump 3. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. I thought maybe it was just a smudge on the monitor. I wiped it with my sleeve, but the shadow was still there. I looked out the window. Sure enough, on the side of the gas pump, there was a long, dark shape. It was perfectly still, a silent stain on the bright metal. I felt a prickle of unease. I went outside, walking towards the pump. As I got closer, the shadow seemed to ripple and then disappear. Just like that. The surface of the pump was clean and unmarked. I went back inside, trying to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, an optical illusion caused by the angle of the sun and the bright lamps. But my eyes kept darting back to the monitors. A few minutes later, the shadow was back. This time, it was on the asphalt next to Pump 1. It was even more defined, shaped like a tall, thin man, its head slightly bowed. My heart started to beat a little faster. There was no one in the parking lot, no car, no source for this shadow. It was just there. Over the next hour, the shadow began to move, slowly. It glided across the asphalt from Pump 1 to Pump 2, then to Pump 3. A silent, dark presence in the otherwise empty lot. I watched it, my stomach churning. It didn't move like a normal shadow. It didn't stretch or distort with the changing light. It moved with a smooth, purposeful glide, as if it was on its own journey. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. It was mesmerizing in the most terrifying way. Then the shadow stopped. It was directly in front of the store, at the base of the front door. It seemed to grow larger, becoming wider and darker, its form a thick, black blotch against the bright concrete. I could feel its presence. The air in the store suddenly felt cold. The buzz of the refrigerator seemed to quiet down, and the silence became heavy, suffocating. I didn't dare look up at the front door. I kept my eyes glued to the monitor, which showed the shadow completely covering the bottom half of the door. The climax came when the shadow began to change shape. It no longer looked like a person. It was a chaotic, swirling mess of blackness, like ink poured onto the ground. The edges of it seemed to ripple and writhe. It was pulsating, expanding, and contracting. I was terrified, my body shaking with a primal fear I had never experienced. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, watching the monitor, a silent witness to something completely inexplicable. Then, from the swirling mass, a long, thin, finger-like projection extended, reaching up the glass of the front door. It seemed to stretch and stretch, a grotesque, inky appendage, until it reached the doorknob. It curled around it, and then the door handle began to turn, slowly. I let out a shriek and scrambled back, knocking my stool over. The sound echoed in the empty store. The shadow on the monitor and the door handle froze. I watched as the black mass on the screen simply dissipated. It didn't shrink or fade. It just dissolved into nothing. The door handle was still. The lights were still on. The silence returned, but it was a different silence now, a more profound and chilling quiet. I spent the rest of the night in the back room, huddled in a corner, my eyes shut tight. When the morning cashier came in, a young guy named Paul, I didn't say a word. I just grabbed my things and walked out, not even bothering to check my time. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror. On the security monitor, I could see Paul walking past Pump 3. And for just a second, a long, dark shadow stretched out in front of him, even though the sun was now shining brightly. It was the same shadow, and it was waiting for him. I knew I would never work a night shift again. I took a part-time gig working the night shift at a gas station in rural Vermont. The owner, a sweet old woman named Carol, told me it was the easiest job in the world. "Nothing ever happens out here, sweetie," she'd say. "You'll have plenty of time to read." And for the first month, she was right. The gas station sat on a lonely stretch of road, surrounded by thick pine forests. It was beautiful in the winter, the snow muffling all sound and turning the world into a silent white landscape. It made the isolation feel peaceful. It was a particularly cold night in late January. The snow was coming down thick and heavy, and the plows hadn't been by in hours. The road was barely visible. I was sitting behind the counter, sipping a cup of coffee, when the little bell above the door chimed. I looked up. No one was there. The door was still closed, but the bell had definitely chimed. I frowned. Maybe the wind? I dismissed it as an old building just being an old building. About 30 minutes later, I saw headlights slowly coming down the road. It was an old pickup truck, covered in a thick layer of snow. It pulled into the lot, barely making a sound as its tires crunched on the fresh snow. The truck pulled up to pump 2, but the driver didn't get out. The engine was running, the headlights were on, but the truck just sat there. I waited and waited. 5 minutes went by. 10 minutes. I was getting a little nervous. I put on my heavy jacket, a pair of gloves, and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a physical force. I walked towards the truck, keeping a cautious distance. As I got closer, I could see that the driver's door was slightly ajar, maybe a few inches open. The interior light was on, but the cab was completely empty. The engine was running, and the radio was on, playing some soft country music. There were no footprints in the fresh snow leading away from the truck. My heart started to pound. This was not right at all. I peered inside the cab again, empty. I walked around the truck, still nothing. The silence of the snow made the idling engine sound deafeningly loud. I pulled out my phone and called the state police. I explained the situation, and the dispatcher told me an officer would be there in about 20 minutes. "Don't touch anything," she said. "Just go back inside and lock the doors." I went back inside, shivering, and locked the door behind me. I stood by the front window, my eyes glued to the truck. The headlights were like two bright yellow eyes staring at me from across the lot. The music was still playing softly. I was starting to feel a little bit better, knowing that help was on the way. I just had to wait it out. Suddenly, the music inside the truck got louder, a lot louder. It went from a soft murmur to a roaring blast that echoed across the snowy lot. I jumped back, startled. The sound was so jarring in the quiet night. Then, as I watched in horror, the truck's headlights began to flash. Not blinking, but flashing rhythmically, on and off, in time with the music. It was a horrifying light show. Then, the truck's engine revved. It was a loud, angry growl. The tires spun on the snow, spitting up chunks of ice, and the truck suddenly lurched forward. It didn't go towards the road. It started circling the gas station, a slow, deliberate crawl, headlights flashing and music blaring. It was like some kind of terrifying, ghostly parade. My breath hitched in my throat. I backed away from the window, pressing my back against a shelf, my eyes wide with terror. I could feel the vibrations of the truck through the floor. It circled the building once, then twice, its headlights sweeping across the front window, creating a dizzying display of light and shadow. Finally, it stopped. It was parked right in front of the door, maybe 5 feet away. The engine was still revving, the headlights were still flashing, the music was still blaring. Then, all at once, everything went silent. The music stopped. The engine shut off. The headlights went out. The truck was just a dark shape in the night. A silent, dead thing. The police officer arrived a few minutes later. A tall, burly man with a kind face. He walked to the truck, his flashlight beam cutting through the snow. He opened the driver's side door, and it was empty. He checked the whole truck. Nothing. He came inside, looking confused. "You're sure the engine was running?" he asked. "And the radio?" "The battery's dead. The engine's stone cold." He told me it was probably a stolen vehicle that had been abandoned. He tried to rationalize it all away, but I knew what I had seen. I watched him tow the truck away, and just as the tow truck was turning out of the lot, I noticed something small and white fluttering on the ground next to where the truck had been parked. I walked out and picked it up. It was a single old-fashioned ticket, a little piece of cardboard, like something you'd get from a haunted house ride or a circus. On it, in faded black ink, were the words, "Your turn." I dropped it and ran. I told Carol I was sick the next day and never went back. I still have no idea who was in that truck or what it was. But to this day, when it's quiet, I can still hear the phantom blare of that country music, echoing in the cold, silent night.